Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive structural shift happening right now in AI. It's a debate touching everyone from indie devs to enterprise execs. The choice is deceptively simple. Do you rent your intelligence from the cloud, or do you own it outright? We're going to look at the math, the hardware, and the ground truth reality of this decision. Let's get right into it. So here is the sharpest challenge in the AI space today. If you can just go and download incredibly capable model weights for free, why on earth would you ever pay a vendor to run them? I mean, it's a fantastic question, right? It's kind of the ultimate challenge to the entire enterprise AI pitch, and it deserves a really serious answer, one based in actual arithmetic, not just vendor hype. To get there, we first have to tackle part one, the myth of free. Look, the absolute most crucial point here is that free literally only applies to the download. It's exactly like getting a free puppy. Acquiring it, sure, costs nothing, but feeding it, taking it to the vet, the chewed up chews, whole different story. This massive gap between downloading a model and actually operating it is where every serious business decision lives. Whenever someone pitches you a quote-unquote free open weight model, they're conveniently leaving out the hardware it runs on, the crazy amount of electricity it draws, and the sheer engineering hours required to keep it reliable. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, open models are just way too far behind the big APIs anyway, which brings us to section 2, closing the capability gap. Because the landscape is moving incredibly fast. Look at mid-2026. We've got DeepSeek V4 Pro hitting 80.6% on SW Bench verified. Kimi K2.6 is leading the open weights on the intelligence index with a score of 54. And GLM 5.1, right behind it at 51, MIT licensed, and actually outperforming GPT 5.4 on SW Bench Pro. The takeaway here is that open models have closed to within just 5 to 15 points of the closed frontier, and we're talking about the benchmarks engineering teams actually care about. In some very specific tasks, they've honestly drawn completely level. And the math behind this is just staggering. What we have right now is effectively 2 regional pools of models, highly overlapping capabilities, but separated by a massive 5 to 25 times price gap. Think about that. That's not some minor detail. That is literally the entire argument. When an open model costs 1/5 or even 1/25 the price of the frontier APIs and can basically hold its own, that automatic just pay for the absolute best reflex, it completely stops making sense. You actually have to sit down and calculate what works for your specific workflow. However, and this is a massive caveat, so pay attention here, a free download just gives you the raw model, and the model is really only half the system. You still need a great harness. And by harness, I'm talking about the context window management, the memory persistence, retry logic, tool routing, the whole shebang. That investment is absolutely not optional if you're going into production. In fact, a slightly weaker model running inside a brilliantly engineered harness will routinely beat a bleeding-edge frontier model that's stuck in a clumsy one, every single time. Okay, let's switch gears to the second major change, section 3, the hardware revolution. This is where things get truly disruptive. Hardware has completely rewritten the rules of local inference, basically in 3 steps. Step 1, unified memory architectures. Think Apple Silicon. This design totally eliminates those awful PCIe bottlenecks that used to hamstring standard graphics cards. Step 2, mixture of experts. With Mo, a 35 billion parameter model might only activate 3 billion parameters to generate a single token. So your memory holds the whole model, but your processing cost drops through the floor. And step 3 is the payoff. When you combine that massive unified memory with sparse activation, boom, you've just pulled AI right out of the massive data center and put it directly onto your desk. Just to put this into perspective, think about this. A Mac Studio with 192 gigabytes of unified RAM can hold a 70 billion parameter model fully in memory and run it without thrashing. No way we could do that a few years ago. We are literally seeing small teams buying fleets of these desktop machines to handle really heavy content generation pipelines entirely locally. They're taking what used to be a massive, recurring, per-token API bill and completely replacing it with a metal box that sits in their office and eventually just pays for itself. But hey, let's be totally honest about the other side of the ledger here. Section 4, total cost of ownership. Because when you really frame the comparison, it stops being this ideological debate and just becomes pure arithmetic. On one side, you have renting, the API route. You get 0 operational burden, you always have the latest frontier model, but you have this endless, ticking per-token cost. On the flip side, owning local hardware means 0 variable costs, but you're hit with upfront capital expenditure and a seriously heavy operational burden. It really boils down to renting capability by the SIP
versus buying and babysitting your own incredibly complex machine.
And let's talk about what babysitting actually means, okay? Because these hidden burdens of ownership are definitely not rounding errors. First, sustained inference draws real power. That is a hefty monthly electricity bill. Second, depreciation. Your shiny, cutting-edge hardware, it's going to look ordinary in 18 months and completely ancient in 36. Then, you've got to manage the quantizations, the model updates, and, here is the really painful one, you have to fix the server when it inevitably breaks at 2 a.m., right? An API provider handles that while you're sleeping. Plus, let's face it, you're always going to be one frontier release behind. So if your volume is low, or you absolutely need the bleeding edge on every single prompt, renting the API easily wins. Those hidden costs add up super fast.
So, taking all of that into account, when exactly does owning outright actually beat the API meter? Let's look at Section 5, the crossover point.
Here is how that crossover point looks in practice. We call it the local winning zone. To be in this zone, you need a few things. You need high, sustained, predictable volume. You need tasks where open models safely clear the capability bar. You absolutely must have an engineering team with the operational competence to keep it all running. And usually you've got some strict requirement around data sovereignty where keeping everything in-house is a must-have. Now, if you do fall into this specific growing zone, owning the hardware wins decisively. And honestly, it wins permanently because your token meter never restarts.
Which brings us right back to our very first question, right? Why pay a vendor like Mistral when you can just download the model yourself? Well, with the DIY route, sure, you get the free download, but you take on that massive engineering burden we just talked about. With an enterprise vendor bundle, you're essentially paying for everything that isn't the weights. You're paying for the integration, the harness, the support. Most importantly, you are paying for a throat to choke when things go wrong, and you're paying for a regulatory compliance posture that a raw file from the internet just cannot provide to a bank's auditor. Honestly, both choices can be exactly right. It just depends entirely on what your team can handle.
But zoom out for a second, because what we are witnessing in 2026 is this profound structural shift. Capability that used to require an entire institution is becoming individually ownable. Think about it. For decades, having serious compute was strictly a privilege for massive, well-funded organizations. Now, an individual with a couple of desktop machines and the willingness to tinker can run their own intelligence. And they can do it at a flat cost that the big frontier APIs simply cannot touch.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to chew on. The word free and free download, it was kind of always a distraction. But what is absolutely 100% true is that for the first time in computing history, the entire stock of intelligence production is within your reach. You can genuinely own it outright. So the real question you need to be asking yourself isn't whether it's free. The question is it yours? And if it is, what are you going to do with it?